After Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, the G7 countries, the EU and Australia froze $300 billion worth of Russian central bank assets. About 200 billion euros are kept in Belgium and 21 billion euros in another unnamed EU country. The anti-war allies agreed on a commitment to share information about the location of all Russian frozen assets with each other.
Russia doesn't stop its barbaric attacks, and again it has struck Ukrainians' critical infrastructure. The reconstruction will be the next huge task, and the longer the war lasts, the higher will be the damage, and it's also clear that Russia must compensate for the enormous losses and damages caused to Ukraine and its people. It has to pay for the cost of rebuilding Ukraine.
According to the World Bank, the cost of restoring and reconstructing Ukraine is currently more than $400 billion. The New York Times writes, the idea of confiscating the frozen Russian assets is finding more and more supporters.
In principle, it is clear-cut. Russia must pay for the reconstruction of Ukraine, but turning that principle into practice is fraught. This must be done in accordance with EU and international law, and there is currently no direct model for this. Ulf Kristersson, Prime Minister of Sweden, Presidency of the EU Council, in an article by the New York Times.
In the meantime, EU member states are looking for legal opportunities to invest Russian assets in something. The European Commission is already exploring the possibility of investing frozen Russian billions with a short maturity and annual return of about 3%, according to a document published by Politico. After that, the income received will be directed to the restoration of Ukraine, but there are certain risks.
Investing in equity would carry higher returns, but a riskier class of assets could generate losses of up to 4 billion euros per year, raising political and financial implications if the EU were to reimburse Russia for losses incurred while investing its assets. In the publication of the American edition of Politico.
Under EU sanctions, if the restrictions are lifted, the owner of the frozen assets should be able to return their capital as well as any income under the contract before they were frozen. At present, the EU does not have complete information on the holding of all the reserves of the Russian Central Bank. Therefore, in the new package of sanctions against Russia, the European Union has included an obligation to report the location of Russian assets on the territory of the EU.
We are really freezing as much of the oligarchs' money as we can find. The question of withdrawing these funds is another thing. Of course, we are looking for legal ways to link this money to crime, and we will prosecute across Europe anyone who tries to circumvent our sanctions. And that will give us more opportunities. Mairead McGuinness, European Commissioner for Financial Services, in an interview with Suspilne.
At the same time, some governments fear that such a move could put any assets around the world at greater risk. Thus, the government of Switzerland stated that the confiscation of private Russian assets from banks would violate the constitution of the country, as well as international agreements. Nevertheless, several allies have already taken steps to seize Russian assets abroad. Last month, a judge in Manhattan, New York, approved the confiscation of more than $5 million from a sanctioned Russian businessman. Estonia also intends to pass a law that will give the government of this country similar powers. Reported by Diana Kulesnik, Христина Домбровська, UATV News.